When was the first you became aware of this deal then?
So we, back in the summer, the previous Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, would be meeting with us a few times over the course of the summer just to say, clearly things were moving forwards and so on. And then suddenly we had a meeting with him in early August, just before we went on the famous holiday. He was much more ashen-faced and things had fallen apart. The fact that an agreement had been signed came out from the Iranian side, and there were sort of various tweets that were put out by their lead negotiator, Deputy Foreign Minister, and then later on our MP met with their ambassador and explained. Okay. So that was from the Iranian side. So part of what we were exploring, is this true? Was it? So actually the Prime Minister confirming that, yeah, there had been an agreement and it fell down. And for me, in some ways it was a good thing that obviously we were close, which means we could be close again. There are negotiations that happen in Vienna at the moment, and that's something to hold on to. Nazanin obviously took it a bit more angrily, that hang on, I could have been home.
Well, it's another false dawn for her, isn't it? And there have been so many on this journey. Just explain a little bit, for anyone who hasn't followed this case closely, exactly what this deal was related to, because there's this debt that we owe from 1979. Why is this now being discussed in 2022? And, where does the money come from? And will this be, a good faith agreement? Will they actually come forward and produce your wife in turn?
Good question.
So many questions.
Yeah, so that's right, that Nazanin was taken, and there was a story that was put out around the fact that she was overthrowing the regime, which was nonsense because she was on holiday. Was taken in 2016, and the reason she was taken in 2016 was because there was a long-running dispute between Iran and the UK over some money that the UK owes to Iran. And the reason we owe it is because back in the day we sold Iran some tanks. They had a revolution. We didn't give them the tanks because it went from being an ally to no longer an ally. Throughout the Iran-Iraq war, they wanted the tanks. Afterwards, they wanted their money back, and a long court battle that got very acrimonious, and sanctions and so on. And so that's how we got taken as leverage, and that's because that worked with the US on a different case. And it's been in the shadows all along, as sort of like us used as a percussion instrument, essentially, to put pressure on the British government and others as well. And for the longest time, the British government didn't want to acknowledge the link and didn't want to move forwards. Probably under Dominic Raab, the previous Foreign Secretary, with the change of administration in the US, there was an attempt that the nuclear deal was going to be revived in Iran, that things were going to move, and kind of like a new era, so we can... And so it's been negotiations in the background, which we've not been party to exactly. Not the all diplomats are quite cautious, but they've not shared it fully. So it's been a long, old process, and we've obviously been waiting with our lives on hold, waiting for them to restart.
How do you push this over the line? I see, for instance, there is a Labour MP, we were talking about Valentine's Day there, Barry Shearman, and he's called for flowers and cards to be sent to the Iranian embassy on Valentine's Day for Nazanin, just to keep her in the news, to keep the pressure on, to keep saying to people, you may have forgotten her, but we haven't forgotten her from this end. Do you actually think that sort of pressure leads to anything, is useful?
Yeah, so yes, it works in different ways, doesn't it? And it was a lovely surprise to see him announce that, send flowers, and she was very pleased by it. There's different things with campaigning. Partly it's to get people to care. Partly it's so that the Iranians look at her as a person, rather than just a bargaining chip. Or even, and then, probably, it's a fair question. What puts pressure on decision makers to move in? And in some ways, what, as an ordinary person, on any issue, can we do? And I do think if enough people care, the right people care enough. And so actually that sort of volume of people just saying this matters. You can't leave an innocent British citizen being used in this way. That's the job of government. First job is to protect. It helps.
Well, the Prime Minister's response to the question in PMQs was, we remain committed to securing the release of Nazanin in all the very difficult consular cases we have in Iran. She knows the debt is difficult to settle and to square away for all sorts of reasons to do with sanctions, but we will continue to work on it. Now, you say she responded to that angrily. And I just wonder, you've been through so much over the years now with this. Of course, your daughter has finally been able to come over and be with you, Gabriella. How's she coping with all of this?
Yeah, well, so when this started, she was just less than 2. So in some ways, that's quite traumatic when you're that small to be taken away from your mum. Certainly very traumatic for the poor mum. But she's young enough that that's all she's known. Obviously, coming back to the UK and she was 5. That was a big adjustment. And she does ask, well, when's mummy coming home? And you know, well, why my mummy? And well, what, you know? And you know, so for instance, last autumn I did a hunger strike. I think you guys came down and interviewed a couple of times. And that was very disruptive for her. And you know, I mean, she refers to it as, you know, your stupid hunger strike, because it didn't work, you know? Yeah. So there's that kind of simple child's logic, which is, why is this happening? When's it going to be sorted? And also, in the meantime, you know, when are we going to go swimming? When are we going to, you know, the fun stuff that, you know,
the realities
not on hold.
for children, they're incredibly resilient.
So this is just now a pure financial issue, is it?
Yes, I think it always has been. I think the complexity now is, I mean, as I mentioned, there are these negotiations for the nuclear deal happening in Vienna, and there's a way in which Nazanin is a bargaining chip in that one transactional problem between the US and between the UK and Iran, but it's also now part of the mix of all those different multilateral kind of pushes and pulls for sanctions. So Iran is doing it with Nazanin and with a number of Brits, Europeans, Americans, trying to get different things off different countries and probably trying to break the stranglehold it feels it's under. So it is that simple, but probably part of the reason why we've had to wait 6 months is because the UK is negotiating with the Americans, wants to bring the Americans home as well, which makes it more complicated for us.
Yeah, of course.
Well, your life since 2016, I mean, it's
been very different,
very different, and so many aspects of it just on hold that I'm sure you've felt, although you've been doing things and you've been active, you haven't been living a life, though,
it's a stunted life in many ways. And I remember that when Gabriella came back, I had to learn to be a dad again, because I spent the time, I mean, being a campaigning dad, but not a real dad, where, I mean, like, literally, bedtimes, dinner, you know, all the things
Well, there were language barriers when she first came.
The language barriers, and certainly, the language barriers, but also you have to kind of earn the right to have your child's trust and to, you know, to enforce bedtimes and the rest of it, and I mean, she would rail in different ways. And there'll be a recovery for us when we're back together as a couple, and it's a long time to be apart. And you know, and my boss would be happy when I come back to work properly, rather than sort of distracted off on television studios and the rest of it.
Well, you've been a wonderful husband.
Is there a date? Is there anything you've got in mind where you think this is going to be sorted this year, this month? Is there?
It's really hard now. So last year it was the end of Nazanin's sentence, so we were counting down to that. When we went through that, it was like, gosh, we're into open water now. And she was given another year last year. Well, that's due to be up next month. So is it going to happen? Is it not going to? I mean, I think probably there are these negotiations going on. They will stop in a couple of weeks. We'll get a sense of, does that mean that things are going to happen for us soon, or does it feel like it's all getting frosty again? And so it's like we'll either get home soon, or we've got a long time to run, I think.
Well, it's shameful.